Hello and welcome back to Skepticus. This is your boy, Adam of Nola. Today I have something a little different for you. Usually I'm picking on Christians, right? But today I wanted to go through the 7 fundamental tenets of the Satanic temple. I got the idea to do this because I was looking at a video from a content creator called The Antibot, and she is a Satanist, and she was looking through these tenets herself. And even when I was a Christian, I always found it very interesting to look at these tenets from Satanists because it was usually pretty surprising the extent to which these tenets are very moral. Christians love to demonize Satanists, literally and figuratively. And of course, for many Christians, just saying Satanist sounds like the worst possible thing. But it's really interesting when you get into some of the literature around Satanism, and you can see how they are nothing like the caricature that is made of them by Christians. Now, a quick disclaimer here before we get into this. I am not a Satanist. I never plan to be a Satanist. I know there are certain Christians who think somehow that atheism is equivalent to being a Satanist, which is ridiculous and couldn't be more wrong. But I still thought that this would be interesting to go through these tenets and kind of compare them to what we see from a moral perspective with Christianity. So let's dive into these. The first tenet is one should strive to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures in accordance with reason. The first thing that stands out to me with this tenet is that it says toward all creatures. Now, I don't know if there are any statistics on how many people that are Satanists are also vegans or vegetarians, but the toward all creatures thing really stands out to me because in Christianity, I believe it is overtly anti-creature, meaning even if you want to make the case that Christianity is about loving your fellow man, and that has a lot of problems to it, but okay, let's give them that for a second. Christianity also is very explicit about this idea that we have dominion over the animals, that we can basically do whatever the hell we want with them. So it's very interesting to me that this first tenet of the Satanist temple specifically talks about compassion and empathy toward all creatures. I have to admit, I've been wanting to be a vegan for a little bit now, and I haven't been able to bring myself to do it. I'll probably do another video on that in the future. But when I think about animal suffering, and when I think about the food industry, the cattle and livestock industries, what happens to animals, I have a hard time excusing. In fact, I don't really excuse it. Although, like I said, I'm a bit of a hypocrite here because I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian. But the fact that they extend this to all creatures is very interesting to me. I also love the fact that it says in accordance with reason. Now, a critic could argue, well, then that kind of saps it of all of its energy, because when you say in accordance with reason, then that's all completely subjective. But as I have said in numerous other videos, everything about Christian morality is absolutely subjective, even though they like to bang this drum for this false idea of objective morality. So I think it's more honest here because they're just saying it outright, in accordance with reason. So yes, there's room for debate here. Yes, this is kind of squishy on the edges, but so is everyone's morality, whether they want to admit it or not. The second tenet is the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. Not only do I love this tenet, but this tenet to me is so much more moral than almost anything that we ever get from Christianity. Here's why. Christianity, especially in the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, is all about laws. It's all about institutions. You are specifically told to obey your slave master. You're told to obey the governmental authorities. You're told to basically comply. It is very rare that anything in the Bible gives you any instruction other than comply or obey. There are some passages where they make it clear that if the rules and the laws are going against God's law, then you are supposed to go against those rules and those laws. But in general, so much of the terminology throughout the Old Testament and the New speaks continually about obedience and compliance. But this tenet from the Satanic Temple is very interesting because to me, this puts it not on a bureaucratic level, but it puts it on a moral level because it's saying explicitly that the ideal you're aiming for here is not to just follow the law. It's not to make the institutions happy. The ideal that you're struggling for is justice. And justice is higher than law. Justice is higher than the institution. In theory, you want your institutions to be heralding justice. You want them to be supporting justice. You want your laws to support and hold up a just society. But we all know that that's not always the case. So while this doesn't tell you to break the laws, it doesn't tell you to rebel against the institutions. It is explicitly laying out the truth that is justice is the higher ideal here. And it also lays out the fact that it's an ongoing and necessary pursuit. I love those words because even when you think, okay, we've got the laws set, we've got justice in the land, even when you think everything's going well, you have to always be vigilant because there might be some group of people who's being discriminated against and you didn't realize it. There might be some problem in the law that was never evident until certain societal conditions change. There will always be a delta between the theoretical ideal of justice, which is up here, and the practical effect of laws and institutions, which is down here. No matter how good your laws become, and no matter how just your institutions are, they will never be perfectly just. They will never be equal. There will always be a delta between the ideal of justice and the actual justice that we receive from our laws and institutions. And this wonderfully spells that out. Number 3 is one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. I find this to be very interesting. I've always been a very libertarian-leaning individual, and this is a big aspect of libertarianism as well, that sometimes when I was talking to people about these political ideas, to get my point across, I would say, who owns you? And I always thought growing up that the obvious answer to this is that you own you. It's amazing how many people I've met who will not say that or do not believe that. They believe that, well, God owns you, or the state owns you, or society owns you. But really, from a legalistic perspective, who owns you? Because if you admit that you own yourself and that I own myself, then it becomes much harder to justify laws that restrict what I can do to myself or with myself. So for example, I don't do hard drugs, but if somebody wanted to do acid tonight in their house or whatever, I don't think that it's just and moral that we would tell them what they can do with their body. Now, I understand it gets into weird areas when we talk about commerce and people interacting with others when they're high, if they're driving vehicles, if they're selling it to school children. So I'm not trying to paint this as being a simple issue, okay? And I'm sure I will probably touch on this in future videos. But in general, what you do with your own body, if you're not hurting anyone else, I believe should be your own right. Now, I'm not going to go deep into this rabbit hole, but I will point out here that this tenet also gets into the same sticky categories when we start thinking about abortion. Because on one hand, your body is inviolable, including if you have another life inside your body. But then again, is the fetus inviolable? Is it its own body, etc.? I'm not even getting into that here. Not trying to go down that rabbit hole right now. So, I mean, you can put comments if you want, but I am just bringing these things up as food for thought as we go through these 7 tenets of the Satanic Church. The next tenet is the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own. I think when a lot of Christians read this, they would kind of by default interpret it as do unto others kind of thing. But I think it's better and more nuanced than do unto others, because it starts off by saying the freedoms of others should be respected. It doesn't say your freedoms need to be respected. Now, of course, if we're all respecting others' freedoms, then yours are respected as well, right? In theory. But it's not saying about your freedoms. It's saying the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. In other words, the freedom of others to offend you should be respected. Now, I know that that can get into some sticky areas. I'm a big free speech advocate, but there are always those gray areas. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, and, there's all sorts of touchy subjects around that. But I do love the fact that it starts off by talking about the freedom of others. Even if that freedom offends you, that should still be respected. And then it closes by saying that if you encroach upon the freedoms of another, you are essentially foregoing your own freedom. One thing I find very interesting in these tenets is that the brain dead response you get from some theists when you're talking about morality is that, oh, you can't have morality without God. You can't have morality without the Almighty telling you what to do. All of it comes from God. Well, there's a lot of morality in these tenets. So I don't know how you think that you can't get morality without God when these tenets clearly have morality. Now, to be clear, I know some of you may be thinking, well, they have a God. Their God is Satan. But there are many Satanists who are atheist Satanists, meaning that they are following the religion more from a philosophical standpoint, and they don't believe in a literal Satan. They don't worship a actual being called Satan. Instead, it's more of a philosophical thing. That's not all of them. Some of them actually believe in Satan. Some of them actually worship Satan. But the point is that you can be very atheistic and you can have a lot of morals. And these tenets, to me, are really one good way of illustrating that. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward. The fifth tenet is beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. Now, when I saw this on the Antibots channel, she kind of took issue with the first part of this, and I agree with it, because to say that beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world is perhaps a little overreaching. Although my beliefs are pretty empirical, I don't think there's something wrong with believing in, say, ghosts. Maybe you believe in ghosts. And although some people would argue with me, if you believe in ghosts, it is not consistent with the scientific understanding of the world, because science has never been able to confirm any ghost sightings, ghostly events, ghostly side effects, etc. Does that necessarily mean that you're bad or wrong for believing in ghosts? No, it's an article of faith, essentially. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. Even when we think about religions, I've said many times, if you think that Christ was resurrected, that's fine. You can't prove it, and I can't disprove it, but if you want to believe it, fine. But I do love this, where it says one should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. I mean, there are 1,000 ways that this would apply to theistic ideas, but the first one that smacks me in the face is creationism. 6,000-year-old Earth, men walking next to dinosaurs. I mean, that's all patently ridiculous. And you guys have seen, I've done videos on this recently. So I do love that, because you don't have to understand all the science on something. And it's fine, I think, to hold certain beliefs that aren't necessarily scientifically backed up. But you should never try to distort scientific facts to fit into your beliefs. That's why I say I don't care if you believe in ghosts, because we can't prove them. We can't disprove them. If you think that you've had an experience with a ghost, if you've had this kind of vision or something, that's fine. You can't prove it. I can't disprove it. We can just move on. But it's quite different when we talk about something like the age of the earth. Everybody with the most rudimentary understanding of science knows that not only is the earth not just 6,000 years old, but they know it's not even close. It's The latest estimates, I guess, are about 4.5 billion years. Billion years. So if you are holding desperately to your creationist beliefs, you are absolutely distorting scientific facts to fit into your beliefs. And that's sad. The sixth tenet is people are fallible. If one makes a mistake, one should do one's best to rectify it and resolve any harm that might have been caused. This one is interesting to me. I almost feel like it's the Satanic Temple's version of original sin, because I think a lot of Christians understand sin as not necessarily being that you've done something wrong. It's being less than perfect. It's being flawed in some level. It's never quite hitting the mark. So to me, this is kind of an acknowledgement of that, saying, hey, people are fallible. You are, I am, everyone's fallible. And then just giving us a reasonable rubric to say, hey, if you make a mistake, do your best to rectify it and resolve any harm. Simple enough. And the seventh tenet from the Satanic Temple is this. Every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. Now, in some respects, I think this is kind of a regurgitation of the second tenet, which said that the struggle for justice is ongoing and necessary, and it should prevail over laws and institutions. This is kind of taking that maybe and ramping it up a notch. Because once again, it lays out an ideal that's higher than the legalistic standard, right? And the second tenet, we said we have to have an ongoing and necessary pursuit of justice, and it prevails over the laws and the institutions. Well, this last tenet says that all of the tenets are designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. And specifically then, it says that compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. So this goes beyond laws and institutions and is basically saying in everything, especially with religious text, that the written or spoken word is nothing but a starting point. It's fine to look at written text. It's fine to watch videos like this and see if you agree with them. But ultimately, if I've said something to you that violates the spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice, you should never, ever say, but Adam of Nola said it, or this is his viewpoint. Like, who cares? Ultimately, the higher ideal is very simple. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice. And that is so much more moral to me than almost anything I ever see in the Old Testament or the New. And I don't want to be hyperbolic in this, because there are passages in the Christian Bible, especially in the New Testament, that are beautiful, that have good ideas behind them, that have good morality behind them. There are, of course, many other passages that absolutely do not. And so much of the damage that comes from Christianity, in my humble opinion, comes from the fact that as humans, with all of our billions of different viewpoints and backgrounds, we can't agree on which one of those passages is right or wrong, which one takes priority, which prophet is more important than the other. So everyone pulls their own interpretation out of it. And that's okay. I really think it's okay. But I only think it's okay if you are constantly working from a spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice. This is why I say things like the Christian ideal of the queer community is dangerous and hateful, because the way Christians treat the queer community in general, and I know this isn't all Christians, but the way that they treat the queer community is not with compassion, it's not with wisdom, and it's not with justice. Instead, they are staking all of their understanding on what they have pulled from the written words. And in many cases, they're staking it on a handful of verses taken completely out of context. That is not compassion, that's not wisdom, and that's not justice. But the Satanic Temple seems to have a much higher standard. Again, I'm going to throw out the caveat here, or the disclaimer, I guess, that I am not a Satanist. I am certain I never will be. I'm not interested in any religion, whether it's an atheistic religion or a theist or a deist religion. I'm just not interested at all in them at this point in my life. But these tenets from the Satanic Temple, despite all of the caricatures that Christians put on this, these tenets are pretty damn good. And more specifically, I would say that if you were to follow these tenets and not follow your Bible, in many cases, you would be a better human being. I'm not saying that Satanic temples figured everything out. I'm not saying that they don't have flaws in their doctrines. But these tenets are much more wise, compassionate, and just than almost anything that I see from the Christian Bible. I think that's kind of a sad statement on Christianity. Thank you for being with me. I hope you've enjoyed this little window into the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple. If that works for you, go check them out. I'm not proselytizing for them, but I think that it says a lot more about Christianity than it does say about the Satanic Temple to read these and see how humane and just and compassionate and wise that they are. I'm glad that you're with me. I hope to see you on future videos. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.